So if both of you, starting with Glenn and Paul, could introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing the last 5-10 years, so we can get to know you, and then we'll start with the questions.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Well, as you introduced me so well, I'm an author. I began writing fiction, writing stage plays and screenplays and network television. And with Howard Lyman's book, Mad Cowboy, I started working writing nonfiction books that advocate the plant-based diet. And some of them, many of them I've co-authored, and some of them, like Own Your Health, Food is Climate, and the latest, America Goes Vegan, I've written the text and had recipe authors collaborate with me. So I just keep trying to devote myself to a vegan transformation of the world.
Thank you. Paul?
Well, Steve, thanks so much for the very kind intro, and it's a real honor to be with Glenn. I have read some of the books that he has co-authored and been a fan. And I believe that actually my wife publishes on the same publishing house, Ben Bella, as Glenn. And we learned before we got started here that we might actually be biologically related. We are certainly we are certainly ideologically related, but we might be biologically related as well. So I hope that we get to the bottom of that soon. But it's great to be with you both, and to everybody who's listening, with you as well. My name is Paul Shapiro. I am the CEO of the Better Meat Co., which is a food technology company that makes ingredients for the alternative protein industry. I also am the author of the book Clean Meat: How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner in the World, which really tells the story of the people who are racing to commercialize the world's first slaughter-free meat. I've been a vegan for more than 30 years. I actually became vegan in large part because of works that were similar to what Glenn was writing about with Howard Lyman and others. And I remember very vividly in the early 1990s what a different world it was for those of us who wanted to be vegan. In fact, when I first heard of being vegan, I only heard about it in written literature, like print literature, and I thought it was vegan. And so for a little while, I was a vegan. Then I met other people and I learned that they were vegans, and then I became a vegan. So it's great to be with you. And like Glenn, I share his passion for promoting plant-based eating. And I think that among the most important things that we can do to protect animal welfare, promote human health, and to promote a better future for the planet and all of its inhabitants would be to slash the number of animals who we are using for food. And so I'm excited to talk with everybody about that today.
So thank you. So could each of you explain what problem it is you're trying to solve with your books, with your work, with your activism? What is the specific problem that exists that you are trying to solve or raise awareness of? Glenn, would you go first?
Well, animal agriculture is simply a nightmare. People all around the world make the mistake of eating meat. It's part of cultures all over the world. And when there were less people in the world, it was perhaps a sustainable mistake, but it's become an unsustainable mistake. And the list of problems created by animal agriculture is endless. You could start with the cruelty to the animals themselves that have to be confined and then slaughtered. And then in my book, Food is Climate, I argue, borrowing heavily on the research of Dr. Sailesh Rao, that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. We hear all about the burning of fossil fuels, but when they do the accounting for that, they're just looking at direct emissions. And perhaps the direct emissions, carbon emissions of the burning of fossil fuels may be greater than animal agriculture, but you have to look at carbon opportunity cost. We have deforested the world to accommodate animal grazing. So when you look at the forfeited sequestration, you realize that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. So we are destroying our planet for this foolish idea of eating animals. We're destroying the waters and the oceans. We're polluting the air. We are causing pandemics. It's just one problem after another. And the solution is, and of course, all our health problems, virtually all our health problems are related to the foolishness of eating animals: heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, inflammatory conditions. So we're destroying the planet in order to give ourselves heart attacks. And that's the foolishness that I'm trying to stop.
Thank you.
I want to augment what Glenn is saying by just stating the following very simply. The planet is not getting any bigger. Humanity's footprint on the planet is getting a lot bigger, but the planet itself is not getting any bigger. And as Glenn very eloquently pointed out, one of the primary ways that we leave that footprint is through our food print, principally in the amount of meat that we eat. It's just no longer a secret that raising animals for food takes dramatically more land, water, greenhouse gas emissions, and more compared to just leaving animals off of our plate. The problem is that meat demand is going up, not down. When I first became vegan in the US alone, there were about 6 billion animals who were raised for food. And today there's about 10 billion land animals who go through slaughter plants every single year, just in the United States alone. And that's not just because there's more humans in the US. We, of course, don't have that many more humans in the last 30 years. It's because per capita meat demand has been going up as well. And the same is happening even more dramatically in places like China, India, Brazil, Mexico, and all the places where, frankly, it's going to matter the most in the future. Per capita meat demand is going up, not down. So when you consider the fact that people in China and India already want to eat more meat today, and we have hundreds of millions of people who recently have escaped poverty to enter the middle class in those countries, which is, of course, great. We want people to escape poverty, obviously, but there is a side effect, and that's a much heavier environmental footprint, principally in the amount of meat that people are eating. And so the question is, how are we going to sustainably feed humanity into the future as we have 8 billion of us today, many of whom want to eat more meat than they can afford today and will be eating more meat as they get richer. And then we're going to have another 2 billion people by the year 2050. So in the next 25 to 30 years, we're estimated to have another 2 billion people on the planet. But as I said, the planet's not getting any bigger. We're not going to be farming the moon. We're not going to be farming Mars. We have one celestial body to farm. And right now, the trends, sadly, are going in the wrong direction. We're emitting more than we ever have. We're raising more animals for food than we ever have. We're eating more meat on a per person basis than we ever have. And so we need to find solutions that can give humans the food that we crave without the need to raise and slaughter all of these animals. And so I believe it's wonderful to have people following a plant-based diet, eating rice and bean burritos, hummus, lentil soup. I love those foods. This is what I primarily eat. But we also need to help people satiate their meat tooth. And I believe that using food technology, that we are able to create foods that people will love, that have a much, much smaller fraction of an impact on the issues that we're talking about here, from climate change to human health to animal welfare and more. And so in the same way that it would be fantastic if people wanted to, bike and walk more, people seem to like to drive. And so we need to make electric cars that don't rely on fossil fuels so much. Similarly, people seem to really want to eat meat. And so we have to find ways to be able to satisfy that without the need to raise all these billions of animals. And as Glenn so poignantly put it, deforesting the planet, since the number one cause of deforestation on Earth is raising animals for food, either grazing land or cropland to feed those animals. So through a mixture of both switching to conventional, traditional plant-based foods and using food technology to displace the use of animals in the way that technology has displaced the uses of horses for transportation and whales for oil and lighting and other forms of animal exploitation that have been displaced by new technologies, that's what I think is going to take in order to turn this situation around.
There are a lot of people in our audience who are strong Republicans. They're passionate Republicans. They do not like the Democrats. They're going to vote for Donald Trump in the election. A lot of our audience, not a small amount. They don't believe climate change is a problem. They don't believe it's real. And they certainly don't believe it's man-made. And part of what they're saying is they have a lack of trust in government. And so because there's a lack of trust in government on a lot of issues, they feel that they don't trust government for anything, and this includes climate change. So while everyone, whether you're Republican or Democrat, could have whatever opinions you want, we certainly don't want to have confusion on something that really is going to affect us. So to all the people in the audience who do not believe climate change is real, or don't believe it's man-made, or believe it's just a money-making opportunity by Republicans, what would you like to say to them? Because they're not going to listen to this lecture about solving a problem that they don't think exists.
Yeah, climate change is one reason to be concerned about how many animals we're raising for food, but even independent of climate change, even if we're just concerned about deforestation, air pollution, wildlife loss, biodiversity loss, and so on, this is a driving cause, a driving causal factor when it comes to wildlife extinction, biodiversity loss, and more. However, the environment is even just one reason alone, even independent of climate change. The other environmental reasons are only one reason alone that we should be enjoying more plants and fewer animals. As Glenn pointed out, the reality is that a diet that's very heavy in meat, eggs, and dairy is associated with many of the biggest killers today, whether it's heart disease, type 2 diabetes, colon cancer, and so many other cancers and more. And so that doesn't mean that everybody is going to go vegan overnight, obviously, but it is clear that eating a more plant-based diet, enjoying more plants and fewer animals is going to dramatically improve public health. As well, the suffering of animals, which is something that has long been a concern to me and is a completely nonpartisan issue. Obviously, animal welfare is not a Democratic or a Republican issue. It's not even a bipartisan issue. It's a nonpartisan issue, is something that I think is worthy of our concern as well. Nobody wants to support animal cruelty, and the ways that we treat animals on factory farms like pigs and chickens and turkeys and cows is frankly so terrible that few people want to even hear about it. I won't describe it here because I don't want people to turn off the channel, so to speak. But very few people want to see how animals are raised for food, and with good reason.
I would just add that there are so many problems related to animal agriculture that I suppose if you don't see all the evidence that the earth is warming, all these 100-year storms that we've been having every year, all the energy in the atmosphere that's leading to more storms and more tornadoes and hotter temperatures. We have record temperatures every year. If you don't see that, but clearly you could see the damage that's being done to our waterways. We just had a pandemic that wasn't caused by zucchini. It's unnatural to house 30,000 chickens in a shed, and it's unnatural to house thousands of pigs together in crates. And I think we can all agree then when animals are housed together like that, that breeds disease. And I know some people say, well, the answer to that is we shouldn't have CAFOs. We should have happy farms where 5 or 10 or 15 pigs frolic around and the cattle are organic grass-fed cattle. But the problem is we can't feed 340 million Americans meat 3 times a day with happy farms. So if we're going to eat animal meat, there's no way to do it other than to have CAFOs. And nobody likes CAFOs, and nobody wants to live downwind of them.
Okay, so then if that's the case, that we have this very big problem, and animal agriculture is torturing the animals, is having a negative impact on our health, and is having catastrophic climate impacts, then we're looking for solutions. So, Paul, do you know of solutions, and where are we with the technology? And I also explain the difference between the Beyond Meat Impossible type burgers and actual clone meat, because I'm not sure what clean meat, which one that means. So
Sure.
Tell us what's going on with all this.
Yeah, Steve, thanks. So if you think about the energy pie, right, you have lots of different ways to make energy without fossil fuels, wind, solar, geothermal, et cetera, right? There's lots of different ways to make fossil fuel-free energy. I have solar panels on my roof as an example, and so I'm very glad that the electricity I'm generating now is coming from the sun rather than from coal or other fossil fuels. But the same is true when we're trying to think of high protein alternatives to meat that comes from slaughtered animals. And one way to do that is simply to eat a whole foods plant-based diet, foods like I was talking about before, bean and rice burritos, lentil soup, and so on. That's fantastic. I hope more people eat those. They're really good for us. They're good for the planet, good for animal welfare, a great solution. However, many people really want meat. And so companies like you mentioned, Steve, Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods have been creating products that do their best to take plants and make them taste like meat. And they do these through natural processes, basically through, like if you think about, let's say, a Beyond Burger, it's made from pea protein, which means you grow a field of peas, you harvest the field of peas, you mill it into a flour, you concentrate the protein down into a protein powder, and then you extrude it, which is a fancy way of saying you subject it to pressure and heat, which texturizes the product. And then you make a burger out of it. And so those products, of course, are in every big box grocery store. You can go to Burger King and get an Impossible Whopper. And these foods are not necessarily health foods in the sense that eating a kale or a quinoa salad is a health food, but they are better than animal meat. They're lower in saturated fat, they're lower in cholesterol, and they are better for you than eating meat from a slaughtered animal. And importantly, they use about 99% less land than raising cows for food. So these are an improvement over the current system of raising and slaughtering billions of animals for food. Now, Steve, what you referred to as clean meat is a different category altogether. That's a category of meat that isn't a meat alternative. It's not a substitute for meat. It's an actual meat product that is simply grown from animal cells rather than animal slaughter. And this technology can enable us to produce real, actual animal meat without having to raise the animal. And so if you think about, for example, let's say, inside of a chicken or even inside of you or me, we have muscle cells that are myosatellite cells that all they do is they build muscle. Their only career path in life is to build muscle. You do a hard workout, you get injured, they go to work and they're waiting, sitting there in your body. They produce muscle. Well, you can take a sesame seed sized biopsy, literally a sesame seed sized biopsy from a chicken. And within that sesame seed sized biopsy, there are millions of these satellite cells. And you can put them inside of cultivators where they basically believe that they're still in the animal's body and they do what they are intended to do, the only thing that they can do, which is to build muscle. And muscle is meat. That's really what it is. And so you can now create real, actual animal meat without the animals. And I've eaten this meat many times from companies that are growing, and I've written about it in my book, Clean Meat. And it's a solution, though, that is not for today. While the FDA has already approved it after a very rigorous examination of the safety of these products, and other nations like Israel and Singapore have also had their health authorities approve it after rigorous examinations of the safety of these products. However, the companies that are in this space are more similar to, let's say, electric vehicles 15 or 20 years ago than they are to electric vehicles today. Anybody with enough money can go out and buy an electric car today, but these products are not available to you no matter how much money you have because they're not really for sale virtually anywhere. Even though the US and Israel and Singapore have approved these products for sale, the companies have not scaled to a point where they can sell any meaningful amount of these clean meats so far. So clean meat is a technology really for the future. I hope it'll be on the market in a meaningful way in the years to come. But right now, plant-based meat is on the market, widely available in every Walmart and Costco and Safeway and so on. And so for people who really want to satiate that meat tooth, so to speak, and you really want that meat type experience without having to raise animals for it, those are the products to get today.
And your book and your work, is it about the future meat that's an actual real meat, or is it about the type of meats that are available today?
Both, actually. So the book primarily chronicles the race between the entrepreneurs and the investors and the scientists who are racing to commercialize clean slaughter-free meat. But I also write about plant-based meat, and I run a company that makes alternative protein ingredients that are not actual animal cells. They're actually coming from fungi. So we grow, at my company, the Better Meat Co., we grow fungi proteins that not only have a meat-like texture, but also are highly protein-packed. Mushrooms are fantastic, and some of them do have a meat-like texture, but they usually don't have much protein. What we do at the Better Meat Co. is grow actual fungi proteins. So this is not fruiting body mushrooms. This is more like mycelium, or the root-like structure of fungi that often grows underground. And that can not only have a meat-like texture, but is also highly protein-packed. So at the Better Meat Co., we grow an all-natural, whole food fungi protein that on its own not only has a meat-like texture, but has more protein than eggs. It's a complete protein, meaning it has all the essential amino acids. It also has more iron than beef, more zinc than beef, no saturated fat, no cholesterol, and it grows instead of in over a year like a cow or half a year like a pig or a couple months like a chicken, it grows in hours. We can grow these fungi in less than one single day. And so the Better Meat Co. is not necessarily plant-based because fungi are not plants, but we're growing fungi-based ingredients that are highly proteinaceous and very meat-like and do the same job as other meat alternatives, but in a way that entails whole foods that are fiber packed and protein packed.
And what's preventing this from getting bigger? I mean, is there just not enough demand? Is there not enough capacity to make it? Like, what's preventing this from becoming a huge thing?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked, Steve. So it's definitely not demand. Demand is far outstripping supply. The problem is when you grow microbial fungi proteins, you need fermentation systems. And the factory that we run in Sacramento that we built can only make thousands of pounds at a time of this product. Whereas, of course, to go nationwide, we really need to do millions of pounds. That means we have to scale up. We need larger fermenters, bigger facilities, and that takes investment capital. So the Better Meat Co. is, as we speak, fundraising to raise the capital necessary to go from what we've done in Sacramento, which is building essentially a pilot plant where we have 24 people full-time running and operating this plant. And we've already been granted numerous patents on the technology that we have invented. But to build something that can produce literally millions of pounds a year of these whole food fungi proteins. And so after we have raised the capital that we need, which is a few tens of millions of dollars, we will then go to a place where we can build much larger fermenters and do exactly what you said, Steve, and usher a river of our mycelium protein into the food industry, even further reducing the need to raise animals for food.
Thank you. Glenn, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I've just finished reading Paul's book, Clean Meat, and it's a very compelling read.
I'm honored. Thank you.
And I enjoyed reading that story of the rush towards lab meat. I'll confess my bias. I am all in on mycoprotein. I'm all in on the idea of mushroom meat, fungi meat, and I'm excited to learn more about Paul's company. I'm highly skeptical of the lab meat. Which, I always hear about it. And in your book, Paul, there were people being quoted saying maybe 5 years from now. And the book is, I think, 5 or 6 years old. I just don't understand, and maybe, Paul, you could address this question. Why, when you have the technology, you can produce the fungi meat now, the mycoprotein meat. And boy, I see the pictures and it looks just like steak.
Yeah.
And the product corn has been around for a long time, QUORN. And I recently had one called Meaty, I think, one of your competitors, I guess. So there are manufacturers, food manufacturers in this space. This product is real, mushroom meat. Why isn't that good enough? Why do we need the lab meat that's always going to be 5 years in the future?
Yeah, great question, Glenn. So first of all, you may be right. It may always be 5 years in the future. That's possible, but you're really raising two different criticisms of cultivated meat. One is that it's not realistic to produce this. And then the other criticism that you're raising is it's not, even if you could produce it, it's not good. And so those are really two different criticisms. The first one about the timeline for commercialization, you may very well be right. It may be that those who are pursuing this are pursuing a fool's errand. On the other hand, that's what people said about electric cars 15 years ago. 15 years ago, the obituaries for electric cars were written everywhere from the Washington Post to the New York Times and elsewhere. And today, those entrepreneurs ended up succeeding, and now electric cars seem to be the future as more and more states like California say they're not going to allow gas-powered engines in the future. Car companies are stating they're only going to sell electric cars. And so 15 years ago, what was determined to be impossible now appears to be inevitable. On the second question, though, about whether it's good. So first off, if people were happy to eat mycoprotein and plant-based foods, I would agree. You don't need clean meat at all. It would be totally unnecessary. However, meat demand is going up, not down. It would be kind of like saying, well, solar is so good. Why do we need wind? Well, you kind of want to have lots of different alternatives because the problem is so severe. And so, in my experience, there's a good number of people who say they want what they perceive as the so-called real thing, in this case, meaning actual animal meat. But I would be elated, Glenn, elated if people were happy to just switch to mycoprotein and to plant-based proteins and would render the need for cultivated meat from animal cells to be obsolete. That would be fantastic. But I wouldn't rule it out, because in my experience, the human desire for meat is pretty strong, and I think we should, have as many alternatives as we can in order to do that. Now, as you know, even after writing a book about cultivated meat, when I was starting my own company 6 years ago, I did not write a book. I did not start a cultivated meat company. I started a mycoprotein company for the very reason that you're noting, that I thought it was more realistic, in part because of what corn, QUORN, has accomplished. I think there's a lot of ways to improve upon what corn has done, but I have a lot of admiration and respect for what they have done to prove that you can grow huge amounts of mycoprotein in a way that is commercially successful. I will note that somebody, I think Stacy in the comments in here, made a very good point. Yeah, this is Stacy Anderson in the comments, did make a point that, there's a lot of people who have dogs and cats who would love to not feed them animal meat, and if cultivated meat was available to them, their cats and dogs would probably be pretty pleased to eat it. So there are some companies out there like Bond Pet Food who are growing actual chicken proteins without chickens. I've actually fed it to my dog Eddie, and he really loved it. So maybe that'll be a use for it as well. I don't know. But in short, I'd be thrilled, Glenn, for it to be unnecessary, as you're suggesting. But given the severity of the problem of animal agriculture, as you correctly pointed out, anything that offers a chance, I'm encouraging.
And Paul, what is the current state of the fetal bovine serum? Is that always being used by these companies, or have they replaced it? You wrote a little bit about that in your book, that they're trying to replace it, but
Yeah.
have they?
Yeah, great question, Glenn. So you read the 2018 edition of the book. I'm proud to say that the 2024 edition has just come out on paperback. So Simon & Schuster has published a paperback edition of Queen Meat, which is updated and actually addresses this point. So in short, many years ago, these companies were using the product that you just mentioned, which is a cow-based product, as an ingredient in the feedstock for their animal cells. Today, nearly all the companies have displaced that for two reasons. One, it's extremely expensive. And two, obviously, they want a totally animal-free product for clear reasons. And so this was an issue that many people who argued that this field was really dead in the cradle, it's now been overcome. They were saying, well, you're never going to get over this because the fetal serum, the bovine serum, is so expensive, but they don't really use that anymore. The companies in this space have gone beyond that. They've created their own animal-free feedstocks that work just as well as the bovine feedstock did. So while this was utilized by companies in the earlier days of this field, it is pretty much an obsolete issue now. But there are still other hurdles. Even though they did overcome that one hurdle that you're pointing out, Glenn, there are other hurdles that have not been overcome. And so I think even if you accept the most optimistic claims from the entrepreneurs and the investors in this space, it's going to be into the 2030s before you start seeing those type of products on supermarket shelves, honestly. So while I personally hope it comes to fruition, I don't believe it's going to come to fruition in the very near term, and in the way that plant-based meat is available at every big box grocery store today. That is a very far way away from happening with meat from animal cells.
Yeah. I'll tell you an anecdote. I started as a comic in San Francisco.
Nice.
And there was a guy who came into town named Lenny, and he hung out in all the comedy clubs. And then he told us that he was going to start his own comedy club, and he was talking to us about whether we would headline in his club. And we said, when is it going to open? And he said, in 3 weeks. And it was always going to open in 3 weeks. We called him 3-Week Lenny. And then finally, one of the comics figured it out. He said, no, the club is really going to open in 3 weeks. They're just not consecutive. So sometimes I think that that's what's going to go on with lab meat. Good. It's gonna happen in 5 years. They're just not consecutive.
That's good. That's really funny. I like that line.
So why do we need alternative meats? Why don't we just use fish farms? We could just keep growing fish farms and use that as a source of protein. What's the problem with that?
Well, fish farms are an environmental nightmare. They're the liquid equivalent of CAFOs. You know, you're concentrating fish in a small area, and it breeds disease. In the documentary Seaspiracy, there's a um, that is exposed.
So
Yeah, so I agree with Glenn. Like fish farming has been not only a concern for environmental reasons, but also there are huge numbers of fish who are captured from the sea in order to feed these fish who we are farming. And so while the welfare of the fish in these farms themselves is frankly very poor, they're overcrowded. It is really like a factory farm for fish. Oftentimes these fish are riddled with what are called sea lice because they're so overcrowded and there's so much fish feces in this very tiny pen that they're in. The water has to be dosed with antibiotics. It's really a pretty unpleasant experience. But all of that said, there are plenty of ways that we can enjoy the taste of fish without eating fish. There's plant-based fish products that are on the market today that are pretty good. I like eating them myself, and I know many others who do. And I know that I want to be respectful of some of the people who are commenting in the chat box here, saying, "Oh, well, they don't want food technology. They just want to eat fruits and nuts," as one person wrote. That's great. If more people would just eat fruits and nuts, that would be great. I would be thrilled for that, for more people to do what you're doing. Sadly, though, they're not. Sadly, meat demand is rising, and it's rising very rapidly. And so while if you have suggestions for how we can persuade people to adopt a diet like yours, I certainly have tried for many decades. But we have to accept reality as it is. And I wish that we were different, but meat demand is going up. And in the 30 years that I personally have been vegan, it's gone up virtually every one of those years for the most part. And that's despite enormous efforts of people like Glenn and myself to try to turn that tide. And I don't want to go another 30 years having been right, but also having been ineffective. My goal is not to be right. My goal is to actually try to make a difference in the world, to make the world a better place. And that's why I'm so supportive of using a variety of strategies to help solve this really vexing problem of how we can wean humanity away from its factory farmed animal-based diet.
now,
One thing Paul and I definitely agree on, we'd love to see that demand for meat fulfilled with mycoprotein. So
Yeah.
mushroom burgers, and also just to give an example of a mushroom burger that's less technologically sophisticated, a portobello burger is delicious. But I'm looking forward to tasting the Better Meat Company's mycoprotein burgers as
Ah,
well.
Glenn, when you're in California next, I hope that I have the honor of hosting you and feeding you a mycoprotein-based steak. I think you're going to love it.
I know I will.
so what are the different? You have this particular type of burger made of mycoprotein. What are all the different versions of alternative proteins that are available today and that are growing and that could develop? And are you committed to the mycoprotein, or is there a chance you would switch to one of the others? What are the list of the different proteins that are being developed and could be the future?
Sure, great question, Steve. So right now, if you think about plant-based proteins that are used to make these types of alternative meat products that we're talking about today, there's really either wheat, pea, or soy. Those are the three crops that are primarily used to make those products. And so pea protein is really among the most popular of those. That's what the Beyond Burger is made out of, as an example. And those are fine products. Again, they are not as good for you as eating a kale salad, but they are better for you than eating animal meat. And so, when people go to Carl's Jr. or they go to Burger King and they have their choice between getting a conventional slaughter-based burger or getting one of these plant-based burgers, we have to keep it real. It is a better choice to get the plant-based burger. It doesn't mean it's the optimal choice. It just means it's better. Similarly, though, in the world of mycoproteins, just as there are lots of different plants that we can make foods from, there are lots of different species of fungi that we can make these products from. And so Glenn mentioned corn, Quorn, which has been in the market now for 25 years and is a good product. Most of the time it's combined with egg whites, unfortunately, but they do have some products that don't have any animal products in them. They have some of their products are vegan. However, they rely on one fungi protein. It's called Fusarium venenatum in Latin, and that is what their entire business is based on. It would be as if people only ate one animal, right? People only ate chickens, they didn't eat cows or pigs, or people only ate peas and they didn't eat, wheat or corn or pineapples or any other plants, right? And so there are thousands of species of fungi out there that are virtually untapped. That world is virtually untapped. And one of the real benefits of choosing mycoprotein is that you get a whole food. In the case of a pea protein-based burger or a soy protein-based burger, you're basically taking out the fiber and the fat and concentrating it down into a protein isolate, right? And that's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's not a whole food, and people are desperately in need of fiber in this country. We don't really have a protein deficiency in the United States, but we do have a fiber deficiency. More than 90% of Americans are fiber deficient, and being fiber deficient is associated with all types of maladies, not just constipation, but colon cancer and a lot of other horrible ailments. So we need more fiber. And one of the ways to get that, of course, is just to eat whole plant foods. But if you want to make a meat alternative out of whole plant foods, it's very hard to do. And so by using mycoproteins, there are many species in the fungi protein world that we can grow the mycelium of them and get something that both is highly proteinaceous and packed with fiber and is a whole food. And so while the plant-based world is fantastic, those products are really good, we at the Better Meat Co. and other companies that Gwen mentions are making whole food meat alternatives that are all natural and that are intact fibers and whole proteins, a complete amino acid profile proteins that create the meat experience in a way that does not require any type of isolation, fractionation, extrusion, or all the other things they do to make the plant-based burgers that are popular today. And so to answer your question directly, Steve, the fungi kingdom is virtually untapped. Corn, which is 99% of the mycoprotein market today, uses one organism. My company, the Better Meat Co., uses not just a different organism, but a different genus altogether of fungi, one that's called Neurospora, which is a different genus that produces in my opinion, much more meat-like experience and doesn't require the addition of things like egg whites or other ingredients to make it more meat-like in the way that corn often does. So I hope that other companies are going to come up and discover other really cool fungi species that they make into whole food products as well. That would be fantastic. But there's not that much yet. Not that much that's on the market as far as mycoproteins are concerned, primarily because it needs to scale. Corn has had 25 years to scale. We at the Better Meat Co. are only 6 years old, and we need to keep growing. So hopefully with time and increased injections of capital, we'll get there.
If I could jump in with a question, Paul, could you break down for us what is the nutritional profile of a Better Meat product? Is it 100% protein? Is there any fat in it? Tell us.
Sure. Yeah, so the mycoprotein that we grow on a dry weight basis is about 50% protein. And so if you think about, like, let's say a pea on a dry weight basis is about 20% protein. And so that's why they have to isolate that protein to make it more proteinaceous, right? That's why they make a pea protein powder by stripping out the fiber and stripping out the fat. Our product is about 50% protein on a dry weight basis as a whole food. And then it's most of the rest of it is just fiber. And it's typically intact fiber, it's very rich in beta glucans as an example. And
so in terms of calories, is it 100% protein in terms of calories?
That's a good question. Would it be 100%? It's not 100%. There would be like a very small amount of fat in there, but it's very small. Like fungi don't naturally produce a lot of fat. That's not just something that they're good at. So yeah, most of those calories are coming from protein. The reason it's called a mycoprotein is just because it's so high in protein for a whole food, even though normally when we think of protein, we're thinking about protein isolates. In this case, though, we're thinking about a whole food protein. And so that's one of the big benefits of utilizing mycelium or mycoprotein is that you get something that is naturally extremely rich in protein that rivals animal-based meat and eggs and so on when it comes to protein and iron and zinc, but you don't have to process it. You can do it in a whole food, all natural way. And the real key is, how do you scale it? Once you're scaled, it's actually quite cost competitive. Interestingly, I was in London not that long ago, and I knew that they were serving corn at KFC, and I just wanted to see it to see what the price differential was. And so I passed by a KFC and I walked in just to look at the menu, and corn's product was basically at price parity with chicken at KFC. So this, you think about other companies in the plant-based space, including some that you mentioned earlier, these companies are selling generally at 2, 3, 4 times the price of animal-based meat. Maybe not organic grass-fed meat, but like conventional commodity animal-based meat. Generally, plant-based meats are sold 200, 300, 400, 500% the price of those meats. Whereas corn growing mycoproteins at actual scale has been able to now rival the cost of chicken, and not just like pasture-based chicken, but actual conventional commodity chicken. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing, and that's our aspiration at the Better Meat Co., the company that I run as well.
Glenn, are you concerned? Some people are concerned that big industries buying these companies that make that when you have meat, there's thousands of ranchers all around, cattle growers, cattle farmers around the country, but this industry could be controlled by a few giant companies. Is that a concern to you, Glenn?
Yes, it is. I mean, when I read that, companies like Tyson and Purdue are investing in this space, it makes me even more skeptical of this space. Again, I'm making a distinction now between the lab meat, I guess a cellular meat, and what Paul's business, which is mycoprotein, and I'm all in on the mycoprotein. But I'm skeptical of the lab meat first because I don't believe it's ever really going to happen. I don't believe I'm ever really going to go to the grocery store and have the option of buying it I don't think at all, and certainly not a cost-effective way. I'm skeptical because of the huge carbon footprint that I read about that it requires. It just requires a great amount of energy to run these bioreactors and to keep them all sterile. It's just such an extraordinary amount of effort to go through. You have to, I guess, exercise the meat. It's an extraordinary amount of effort to go to when you could just get great mushroom meat. So I don't really understand putting all the money into that. I write stage plays. I could have had them all produced on Broadway 10 times over for what they've invested in this thing. So would have done much more good for the world and certainly for me. I'm just skeptical of that idea and the idea of sort of conceding the point, which I don't want to concede, that people must eat animal meat. I think, yeah, people have a desire for patties, have a portobello burger, I'm spacing on the name of your company, Paul.
That's okay. That's okay. So Glenn, so first of all, you may very well be correct on this. Yeah. And if you are, I hope that the other alternatives are successful. I do want to point out, I'm not claiming that humans must have meat. Obviously, you and I are living, breathing examples that is not true.
Right.
And self-servingly, I'll say, if you want a great cookbook for awesome whole food plant-based recipes, my wife, Toni Okamoto, has published 4 of them. They're really good. Go check her out. But I'll say this. It's not that humans must have meat any more than we must have cars. People seem to really want meat. And I'm not saying that, there's some people on here, like one person commented that, one person, Deke, commented, I'm going to keep making my own almond, flaxseed, walnut, chickpea, mushroom burgers. Deke, I hope you'll invite me over so that I can have one of those. It sounds great to me. I would love that. I question whether McDonald's is ever going to serve almond, flaxseed, walnut, chickpea, mushroom burgers. Maybe one day they will. But I have a feeling that for the people who are going there, they want meat. And that's my hope, is that the cultivated meat industry may be able to satiate that demand. Now, Steve, to answer your question directly about how many companies there are that are involved in this, I'll say it's true. There are many food companies that are investing in the alternative protein space. And we could look at them as, being skeptical in the way that Glenn mentioned, but I'll also point out, this is what happens when there are transition in industries. Think about, for example, in film. We had for decades, Canon and Kodak were vying for supremacy in the film market. And, for those of you who are old enough to remember, we used to have to get film by going to a dark room and using chemicals and making print film. I mean, I remember when 1 hour photo came out, like I think it was probably around 2000, if I remember correctly. And I couldn't believe that I could get photos in 1 hour. I thought, I can't believe I've lived so far into this sci-fi future that photos could be gotten in 1 hour. And of course, now we get photos in an instant. If it took even 1 minute, people would be outraged if it took a minute to get a photo. But it's not that we had tiny companies who were startups that came and slayed the giant Goliath corporations. It was that Canon invested in digital photography. And of course, Kodak did not. And we also, what happened? Kodak went bankrupt, and Canon is the largest manufacturer of digital cameras on the planet. Canon knew that this was going to cannibalize its core business, but they invested in the new technology because they thought it would be a more efficient way to do the same thing. Because keep in mind, photos do the same thing for us. Digital photos capture our memory, right? They do the same thing that a print photo does, but way more efficiently. And the same is so with alternative meats. They do the same thing for us. They give us the experience of eating meat, but they do it way more efficiently. Just like clean energy. You walk into a room, you hit a light switch, you're not thinking, is this light coming from coal or natural gas or wind or solar? You just want light in the room. Well, most people are not like us. Most people aren't sitting there thinking about their health or the animal welfare or the environment when they're eating. They just want food that tastes good. And they'll be happy to eat foods that taste good, that are safe to eat, and that are cost effective if we can provide it for them. And so some of the big companies in the food industry today, I think, are more like Kodak. They have their head in the sand, and if these alternative proteins succeed, they will go the way of Kodak and declare bankruptcy. But others are like Canon, and they're a behemoth in the space today, and they're investing in the future because they believe that the future may be cannibalizing their core business, but it may be the future. And so they don't want to be left behind. And so I'm not that skeptical when food companies want to invest in what they perceive as the future. My real concern is, if they're investing in it to try to kill the technology, that's one thing. But if they're investing in it because they want to make it part of their core business, I'm not as concerned. But my hope is that people will find ways to eat fewer animals. If that is because they want to grow their own food in their garden and eat kale salads, and do the Deek Rush flaxseed walnut chickpea mushroom burger, fantastic. That would be great. Unfortunately, I think most people are going to want meat for a long time to come. And that means that if we don't do anything, billions of animals are going to be raised for food, and we will be creating a much worse future for humanity and for animals if that comes to pass.
Let me give you two reasons why I'm skeptical when I learn that Purdue or one of those Cargill or whatever is investing in lab meat. One reason is I ask myself, are they just trying to greenwash themselves? Say, oh, you can keep eating meat. Don't worry, we're trying to help with a clean future. And in the meantime, keep eating our slaughtered animals. The other possibility is if they really believe that this technology is going to happen, maybe they're hoping it will just help them enhance their meat products. So they'll add a little lab meat to their dead cow meat. I just don't think they're really in the business of trying to replace themselves and their industries.
Yeah,
So
that may be so, but even if they did what you just said, Glenn, and they were to, let's say, make 50-50 burgers, so it's 50% plant-based proteins or microproteins, that would still reduce the number of animals raised for food by billions. So it's not that bad. I mean, hybrid cars are not, it's not as great as an electric car, but it's a step in the right direction. So I'm just feeling like more wanting to be more pragmatic about how we are able to actually make a dent. Like, the problem is that despite making what I perceive as very persuasive arguments for decades now, people like you and Howard Lyman and others and myself in that category, we've made these arguments. All the same time, meat demand has been going up and up and up and up. And I just want to make sure that we don't go to our graves having been, again, right, but just, tilting at windmills here, and instead go to a place. Oh, look at that. What a beautiful website.
Now that looks beautiful.
So
Yeah.
Paul, let me ask you this. What is it, just money? If right now a billionaire said, I want to invest in this company, is that all that's needed to make this
Yes.
a national thing? It's just money. You have the technology. It tastes good. It's healthy enough. This is a solution. It's just missing the money.
That's exactly right, Steve. The technology has been invented. We have numerous patents on our technology that we've invented, and we are now in a position to scale. All we need is the money to scale. So this is very unlike what we're talking about with plant-based meat. And I love Glenn's line, they're not consecutive years. That's really a wonderful line. And so I'm going to use the Lenny line and say this is very much not like Lenny's Comedy Club. This could be scaled up next year if we had the money today to make all these products. What you're seeing there is all mycoprotein, bacon, sausage, turkey slices, fish fillets, and so on. And we can make all of those from the mycoprotein that we grow if we could
How
just.
many people, if let's talk about the United States, if we have 330 million people and they gave you enough money, how many people could you feed with this technology if you had enough money?
I mean, 100% of them, because the thing about this is we don't have to go out and find fungi in the environment or farm fungi in the environment to do this. This is a completely controlled process. And it's kind of like, think about it, Steve, like a sourdough culture. Once you have that culture, you can use it and propagate it in perpetuity, right? And the same is so once you have your fungi spores, those same spores can be used to grow literally millions and millions of pounds. Microscopic spores can be used to grow millions and millions of pounds of this mycoprotein. And so what you're seeing here, and I appreciate you bringing this up, what you're seeing here is a Better Meat Co. steak that is mycoprotein that is on the menu in Sacramento at restaurants where you can go and just order a mycoprotein steak, and it is way better than the plant-based meats that are making steak out there. I can assure you that. It is delicious. It's whole food. It's all natural. It's non-GMO, and it's absolutely fantastic. And so with sufficient funding, yeah, we could supply the entire world's meat supply if you wanted to put all your everything in one basket, which you wouldn't, right? You wouldn't want one company making the entire world's meat supply, but theoretically it's possible because of the nature of mycoprotein.
And what is the two other questions? What is the nutritional profile? Can you live on this? Can you get enough protein? What are you not getting in this that you get in steak and chicken and animal products?
Well, you're not going to get saturated fat. You're not going to get cholesterol. You're not going to get antibiotic residues. You're not going to get increased risk of pandemics and more. What you are going to get is a lot of protein, a lot of fiber, a lot of iron, and a lot of zinc. Now, of course, you don't want to just live on one ingredient, right? You want to be able to enjoy a balanced diet of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and so on. But if you're thinking about a protein that is not an animal protein, and you want something that has the complete profile of amino acids, this is what you want. Most plant-based proteins are not complete. Now, that doesn't mean they're not good. It just means they don't have all the amino acids. But if you eat a balanced diet, you're going to get the amino acids you need. But it's rare in the plant kingdom where you have all of the amino acids already naturally present in one particular food. And that's what you get with the Better Meat Co's mycoprotein.
What is the environmental footprint of this compared to meat?
Oh, it's a minuscule fraction of the land and the water that's needed to raise animals for food, because think about it, inside of a fermenter, just a stainless steel fermenter, like what you would see in a craft brewery, instead of brewing alcohol, we're brewing protein, but it looks the same. It looks like a craft brewery. You walk in, and literally from the time that we inoculate our fermenter until the time that we harvest our fermenter is about 16 hours. And so it takes, again, a cow more than a year before you get a steak. You have to feed a pig for half a year before you get a pork chop. You have to feed a chicken for about 40 days before you get a chicken nugget. Whereas in our case at the Better Meat Co., we go from very beginning of the fermentation to end of the fermentation in 16 hours. And so it's so rapid, it's so resource light that we could produce massive amounts of rhizomycoprotein with very few resources. This is among the most efficient ways to produce protein on the planet, honestly.
Glenn, what do you think about this? Does this solve all your concerns? What's your concerns?
Well, here's what I think. I'm talking to the man who wrote this very good book, Clean Meat. And I really feel that what I'm looking at here is the best answer yet to why we don't need lab meat. We just need this. I mean, if I were a billionaire, would I put money into this, which is real, which looks delicious, and I'm sure it is, which has so much potential, which is healthy, which is made from mushrooms, which are human food? Or would I put my money into something that 3-week Lenny would go for, which is something that's never going to happen, that's not going to be healthy because it's going to be animal protein, which is carcinogenic? Which has been a fantasy now for decades. So, I think that in a certain way, Paul has made the best argument against lab meat, which is his own wonderful product.
That's
Right.
very kind of you. So I definitely appreciate that, Glenn. So I want to be clear. Again, I am I would be delighted to see cultivated meat come to market, but it's not coming to market anytime soon. You're absolutely right. That criticism of that industry that you level, I agree with. The others, I'm less sympathetic to those points, but it's all like I think it's worth writing about because I think it's an interesting thing. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like fusion energy. If it worked, it would be amazing. But so far, no, people have been trying for a very long time, but nobody's been able to do it. And if you ask any of them when they're going to be doing it, it's always 10 years away,
Right.
hopefully 10 consecutive years. But all that said, if you were a billionaire, Glenn, I would say don't invest in cultivated meat then. You don't have to. Go
Right.
to protein or plant-based protein. There's lots of different ways to peel this potato, so to speak. We can do this with lots of different ways. And I think you're identifying something that's absolutely correct, which is that because of my sense of the dire urgency of this problem of animal agriculture, I am investing my time in my company and all the resources that we have to mycoprotein because that's what I
Yeah.
think will make the fastest dent in this problem.
Yes.
If anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Um, so Paul, it sounds like we've solved a lot of problems here. If this tech, so how does this taste? Because if it tastes good and it's environmentally good and it doesn't hurt the animals and it doesn't use a lot of resources, it sounds like if I agree with Glenn, forget the clean meat part completely. Did we just solve an unbelievable? Is this the solution we've been waiting years and years for?
Frankly, I think that it is a solution. I don't think it's the solution, but I think it's part of the solution. The problem is so vast that we need a lot of different strategies. But I think it's the most promising of the strategies, which is why I'm devoting my life to it. Now, you ask how it tastes. Don't let me tell you. I'll give you a lot of people in the comments are talking about pets or talking about dogs and cats. So I'll just give you one quick example that I really enjoy telling. My dog, Eddie, is a very finicky eater. He doesn't like plant-based meat. He won't eat it. If you give him a Beyond Burger, he won't touch it. He will not touch vegetables, fruits, nuts. I mean, this dog wants meat. It's like unbelievable how anti-vegan he is. If I offer him a Better Meat steak, he devours it, devours it. And I didn't tell him it was mycoprotein, so he didn't know. I kept him in the dark, but he loves it. As well, when we do blind taste tests with consumer focus groups, overwhelmingly, it rates the best out of all of the alternative meat products. Overwhelmingly. Despite the fact that it's a whole food that's all natural, it's not loaded up with salt and so on. This is a really delicious, all natural product. So I think this is the most promising solution, which is why I devote myself to it. I am also interested and supportive of other solutions, but I'm doing this because I think it's the way to go as far as making a dent in the rapid near term with trying to create foods that are healthy, all natural, and are actually meat-like, right? Like it's hard to turn walnuts and chickpeas into something that fools meat eaters. But in this case, you can actually do it. So that's why I'm so enthusiastic about this. And if people share that enthusiasm, even if you're not a billionaire and you want to invest in the future of mycoprotein, I'd love to hear from you. Our website is bettermeat.co. Again, that's bettermeat.co, and you can message us through there, or you can message me. My email is just paul.shapiro@bettermeat.co. Again, that's paul.shapiro@bettermeat.co. And I'd love to hear from you because if you share a desire to see this ingredient get scaled to a place where we can actually really start displacing millions of pounds of animal-based meat, let's do it together.
Glenn, someone might be watching this and they might say, yeah, this sounds pretty good, but just use eggs instead. So why do we have to go through all this trouble? Why don't we just use either fish from the ocean or eggs? They're sources of protein. You don't have to kill a chicken to get an egg. What's
Well,
wrong with that?
this word protein, sometimes I wish that protein hadn't been discovered. Yes, there's protein in eggs, but there's saturated fat and cholesterol. What the meat industry does, what the animal food industry does, is they pick their favorite macronutrient protein and they describe their products as protein. But you can go into a restaurant, the waiter could just as well say, what's your choice of saturated fat and cholesterol, pork or beef or fish. So fish and eggs are terribly unhealthy, and they cause heart disease and diabetes and obesity. Paul is giving us a healthy protein, so from mushrooms. So you know, no animal products are a solution here.
Patrick, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Steve. New York. Hi, Paul. Just a couple of points on the work that you're doing there. Sorry, I wasn't 100% clear. Is the protein a product that's produced by the fungus, or is the fungus itself the protein?
Oh, thank you, Patrick, for asking such an informed question. The fungi itself is the protein source, so that we're not, you know, because you sound like you are obviously informed on this topic. So for other people, many times in the world of fungi fermentation, people use the fungus as almost like a factory, so to speak, to produce other enzymes or something like that. That's not what we're doing. We use what is called whole biomass, which is the entirety of the fungi. That's the product we eat. So if you think about, let's say, a comparison to, I don't know, let's say chickens, you know, some people farm chickens so they can get the chicken to create an egg and then they eat the egg. Other people farm the chicken so they can get the meat from the chicken. We're not getting the fungus to produce something else that we're eating. We're eating the entirety of it. And unlike a chicken, you know, you don't have a beak and a skeleton and a brain. Like the entirety, 100% of that fungus is what we use. So it's called whole biomass fermentation. And so it's a lot more cost effective than the technology that you were alluding to that expresses proteins, which is sometimes called precision fermentation. It's a different technology.
And what's the food source for the fungus?
Just like any fermentation, whether you're making beer or whether you're making anything else, almost always it's going to be sugar. So basically what these microorganisms do is they consume sugar, and then by the end of the fermentation, they've built up their bodies, right? They create, basically, you're taking a low quality starchy material like sugar and putting it into water. You inoculate that water with a few spores, and by the end, there's no more sugar left because they've consumed it. And instead, what you have is this highly protein-packed mycoprotein.
Yeah, no, conceptually, I know how it works, but specifically in relation to what you're doing, you know, if you start talking about producing meat on a population scale, you need an input that's on a similar scale. So what are you using is specifically what I'm asking you.
Yeah, sugar. So if you think about right now, we raise, you know, think about how many acres are used to grow corn or cane and so on, right? And so if you switch from corn, feeding the corn to cows or to chickens, and instead feed that corn, the corn sugars to the microorganisms, you need dramatically less corn than what you would need if you were raising animals. So, you know, there's not a shortage of corn in the world, right? Like that's not the concern. There's not a shortage of cane in the world. That's not the concern. But we would need far fewer acres farmed of corn if you were instead growing mycoprotein rather than animal-based foods.
So there's ways you can scale this other than just trying to build it all yourself. You mentioned patents. I'm sure you're familiar with licensing business models and so on. If your patent position is strong enough, you can have an incredibly profitable business based on a licensing model.
We're open to that. You know, any sugar company in the world presumably would want to license our technology. You still have to build it though. So you still need to build the actual fermenters. So an ideal scenario would be co-locating next to some sugar source, whether it's beet sugar, cane sugar, corn sugar, etc. But you still have to build these fermenters, and they're big. You know, we're talking like 40 meters tall if you want to get to scale. So if you look at what corn in the UK is doing, as Glenn mentioned earlier, you know, they have these fermenters that are literally, you know, 120 feet going into the sky. And that's what you got to do to get to the scale where you can actually start competing on cost with commodity animal proteins. So even if we were licensing our technology, there's still a good amount of construction that needs to be done, but it would be nice for them to pay for it rather than us. So maybe we'll do that. But we're open to a co-location model that would be like a joint venture as well, where we could split the capital expenditure cost.
Glenn, do you think that if you liked what Paul was saying and you really believed it was the greatest answer, is the way to market something like this to tell people how horrible climate change is, to tell them how much they torture the animals, or to tell them how much heart disease you're going to get? What is have you found is the way that people hear?
Oh, I'm guessing that the best way to market it is to emphasize how delicious it is. I'm guessing that that's what would sell the most of his product, and that's what would, you know, uh, create the most change. So many of my books have a section with recipes, so that people taste the food, and when they realize that food tastes good, and frankly, I think our plant-based food tastes better than meat ever did, then that's what often gets people to change their ways. And I'm sure Paul's product is delicious, and I think if it wins the taste test, it gets, it gets public acceptance.
It's
Yeah.
it's interesting because my family grew up on corn, the CUORN brand, and I always said this is weirdly satisfying, very, very good. I didn't know what it was, but I always thought it was very, very good, like not a compromise. So I've been in, for 15 years, we've been eating that product, or my, family, and we've always thought very highly of it. So it definitely tastes, if this tastes as good or better, then it must be something really good.
I agree with you. Yeah, first of all, I agree with what you're saying, Steve. And I eat Corn's vegan products, and I like it. I don't think it tastes identical to animal meat, but I do like it, and I do find it quite satiating. I kind of view it a little bit like tofu, maybe, and not that it tastes like tofu, but I think if you enjoy tofu, you eat tofu because you like tofu, not because you think it tastes like chicken, right? And I think the same is so with corn, QUORN, which is that if you like the taste of corn, you eat it, and that's good. And I'm one of those people who does like it, just like you. Now, all of that said, what Glenn is saying, I think is absolutely correct. The actual reasons to switch to a plant-based diet are manifold. We've already enumerated many of them here today. Unfortunately, most people, when they're making their decisions about what to eat, are not considering the environment. They're not considering animal welfare. Oftentimes, we're not even considering our own health. That's why French fries and burgers are so popular. So the question is, how do you actually market this? And I think what Glenn is saying is right, that it tastes really good. And it's got to be cost competitive. Like if you can make the better option taste as good, if not better, and be the same price or cheaper, that's the way that we actually win. Unfortunately, I just don't think that people are going to spend a lot more money to eat something that they think doesn't taste as good.
So how do is the technology done, or is there another level that if you could get to, it would be even better? Or is it pretty much done at this point?
There's always room for improvement. There's always room for new innovation. We're making digital photography gets better every year, right? But we are already done with the invention phase when it comes to mycoprotein. When it comes to mycoprotein, we at the Better Meat Co. have already mastered how to grow large amounts of it in a cost-effective way. Literally, the only thing that is preventing us from unleashing a river of millions of pounds of mycoprotein into the American food market is the capital needed to scale, basically to buy much, much, much larger fermentation systems.
So how do people invest in this? Maybe there's someone in the audience that's an investor. How do they invest in you?
You can contact me. We're actually raising a fundraising round right now. We already have about $15 million committed from many investors, and we're looking to about double that. So if you're interested in that, I'd love to hear from you. My email address is paul.shapiro@bettermeat.co. Again, paul.shapiro@bettermeat.co, and I'd love to hear from you.
Glenn and Paul, do you want to each take a minute to give any final closing thoughts on what we've been discussing tonight and anything else? Glenn, you want to start?
Well, again, I want to congratulate Paul on what he's doing, which I think is the sensible, reasonable, realistic, and hopefully profitable way to replace animal meat. I remain skeptical of the product that doesn't exist yet commercially, the lab meat, and I also think that when it does, there's no reason, if it ever did, there's no reason to believe that the meat eaters would accept it, and they're going to have to, as I understand it, add fat to it. It doesn't have the natural fat that the animal products. And so just like the plant-based meats, The lab meat will, I believe, and Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, would have to be a creation. They would have to add the fat to the protein, you know. So why do that when something really exists? The mycoprotein, it's real, it's here today with more capitalization. Maybe it could be everywhere tomorrow. And so I'm rooting for Paul and the Better Meat Co. And I'm not holding out hope for the 3-week lab meat.
Okay, so first and foremost, Steve, I want to say thank you for hosting us. Everybody who's joined in and offered comments, either in the chat or Patrick, you got to ask live. I really appreciate your interest in this and in what we are offering as well. Glenn, I want to thank you for decades of service to trying to make the world a better place. You have influenced a lot of people, myself included, and I truly am grateful for that. I think that in the future, people are not going to associate the word meat or protein just with animals in the way that many people do today. Today, when people think about meat, they think of a hunk of flesh from a slaughtered animal's body. In the future, though, I think people are going to have a far more diverse association with what counts as protein or meat in that sense. And I think that's going to come from a variety of sources, including plants and including fungi, and maybe, we'll see, maybe also from animal cells. However, I believe that growing microproteins today is the fastest, most realistic, most obvious solution to this problem of how we are going to satiate humanity's meat tooth without the need to raise and slaughter billions of animals for food. And if we can accomplish that, it will create a much different, much better world. Many things were perceived as totally impossible until a new technology rendered it totally inevitable. We whipped horses for thousands of years before we decided that we no longer needed to do it. And nobody stopped whipping horses for labor purposes because they cared about horses. They stopped because we had better ways in the form of bikes and cars to get around. We, for thousands of years, harpooned whales in order to light our homes. Nobody stopped because they cared about whales. They stopped because kerosene and eventually electricity were invented, and those are much cleaner, more efficient ways to light our worlds. For thousands of years, we live plucked geese, and that was how we wrote. We had quill pens. The Magna Carta, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, these were all written with quills that were live plucked from geese's bodies. And nobody stopped live plucking geese because they cared about geese. They stopped because metal fountain pens were invented. And metal fountain pens are a dramatically superior way to write because you no longer had to stop and dip your quill into an inkwell and sharpen the quill tip and so on. And now we write by tapping on glass screens or even talking to glass screens. And so technology has a way of transforming industries that have been around for millennia into something that is way more efficient. That's what I believe that we can do with food technology to create a much better way to satiate humanity's meat tooth without the need to torment and slaughter billions of animals for food. And that's the type of future that I'm working toward. And if you're listening in on this, you probably want that type of a future as well. And so I'd invite you to please join us in this mission to create that type of a better future. You can visit us at bettermeat.co, and I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay. And Glenn, how do people stay in touch with you?
I have a website based on my name, just glenmerzer.com. I have a newsletter that I put out called the Own Your Health newsletter. And I have a podcast now called The Glen Merzer Show. I was going to call it the Own Your Health podcast, but that was already taken because there are 12 million podcasts out there. But please, I hope people will watch the podcast and subscribe.
And Paul, how do we stay in touch with you?
Well, first of all, I'm embarrassed to say that I have not talked with Glenn on his podcast, so I hope that changes. But
I would love to have you as a guest, sir.
It would be my great honor. So my website is bettermeat.co. Again, bettermeat.co. I'd love to hear from you. And it would be a real pleasure to get to talk with anybody who listened in on this conversation tonight. So hopefully you'll email me. And if you want to get me directly, again, my email is paul.shapiro@bettermeat.co.
Thank you both very much. If we could unmute the audience so they can thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it would be good.